Dibrig tú go díon nó chánig tú go dtí an chathair seo, fuair his neart taithí agus d'urbar de chud scileanna. I ngacháte éigean tú, fecinn tú rud éige na chabhraigh tú a thógáil, ach inis tá tú ag féchant ar an todhchaí, agus beidir go bhfuil tú ag smaoinemh ar an áit as a dagan tú. In éireann, tastaíonn pleanálathe, siúnéirí, ploméirí, díanadóirí, inaltóirí, altíirí, banistóirí láithreáin agus níos móhain. Tastaíonn túhain, le do chud scileanna agus taithí go léir, chun cabhrúlinn na mílte tithe a thógáil. Tá an domhan tóga agat, a níos tar arás agus tógan teach a thóg tú. Tuile eolais ag gov.ie/Building Ireland. Teachtareacht ó rialtas na hÉireann.
This episode is brought to you by Paranormal Playback, a new podcast where hosts Shar, Mel and Laura recap the spooky and entertaining world of paranormal reality TV. Each week they take a fresh look at popular shows like Ghost Adventures and Kindred Spirits, blending humour with insight as they pull apart what's happening on screen. The three of them are a mix of believers and skeptics, which makes for really fun conversations, sometimes leaning into mystery, other times asking the questions viewers might be thinking themselves. With their background in creative production, they know how these shows are put together, so they're great at pointing out the moments that feel real versus the ones that might be more for the cameras. And their segment, This Old Haunt, digs into the true crime side of paranormal investigations, separating fact from fiction. With Halloween coming up, it's the perfect time to add something spooky, funny and a little addictive to your playlist. For even more spooky, ghostly, paranormal content with a humorous spin, go check out Paranormal Playback. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Scary. If you're new here, my name's Will and each week I narrate your real life paranormal encounters as well as some famous paranormal cases along the way. Before we get into this week's episode, as always, we need to thank our new Patreon subscribers who are Lisa L, Claire O'Rourke, Stephanie Hollis and Debs Caroke. Thank you so much for signing up to the show's Patreon. And if this is something you're interested in, you can find the link in this episode's show notes or simply go to patreon.com/scaryaparanormalpodcast where you can gain access to exclusive scary episodes and ad-free main episodes. But now, let's get into our first paranormal encounter. It's hard to know where to begin. I suppose it was a series of events that happened over the space of 10 years. So, here we go. My parents decided to leave the UK in 2001 and move the family to France. They bought a big property in the French Alps that dated back to the 1970s. It was near the French, Swiss, Italian borders. I guess the house wasn't that old, but it stood at the foot of a hill, on top of which were the ruins of an ancient castle. I guess the land must have been charged in history. Being on a hill, the house was half underground. The main living area and bedrooms being on the first floor, and then a semi-underground basement that had a game room, wine cellar, guest bedroom. The place always had a feeling to it. I guess you could say that the air was charged. And if I'm honest, the house didn't have a positive energy to it. I think the first time we experienced something strange was when my then boyfriend stayed the night. I must have been about 15 at the time. So he slept in the guest bedroom downstairs, and at some point in the night I was awoken by the sound of a door banging and then somebody coming up the stairs. I was fully expecting him to sneak into my bedroom. I waited and waited, but nobody ever came. I went back to sleep, and the next morning asked him what he was up to in the night, and he said that somebody had gone downstairs and into his bedroom, thinking maybe it was my parents checking up on us. I asked them, and they hadn't heard a thing and had been fast asleep. Over the years, I would always see the odd shadow or movement in the corner of my eye whilst brushing my teeth or pottering around. The first time, though, that I was truly terrified was when I woke up one night to find a figure hunched next to my bed. This figure just standing there next to me. I remember I couldn't even scream out for my mum. I just hid under the covers and must have eventually nodded back off to sleep somehow. We had a large electric piano in the living room, which was behind my bedroom wall. We'd always had headphones plugged into it so as to not to bother the rest of the family when one of us was practicing. I could often hear the clunk of the keys playing silently away at night. My dad used to love winding my mum up by buying really tacky knickknacks, and he bought a Wallace and Gromit clock that would play this theme tune if you pressed on Gromit's head. One night this went off in the living room all on its own, waking up the whole family as the music blasted out. The property had a really nice garden and pool, and so one weekend when my parents were away, I decided to throw a bit of a party with some friends. Late on in the evening, when most people had left and it was just a small group of us chatting away in the living room, all of a sudden the most harrowing sound came from the basement. It sounded like a very crackly old radio that started playing this kind of howling female opera type voice. I just remember it seemed to echo through the basement and all the way up the stairwell. I can't even describe how scary this sound was. It was the kind of thing that sent an immediate shiver through your body. A few brave people went downstairs to investigate, but the sound stopped and we had no idea where it had come from. So in the earlier years, as you can see, it was just a long list of these odd things happening, but it wasn't that frequent, maybe once or twice a month. In the last 2 years before they moved, things really seemed to crank up. Often my mum would say to me in the mornings that she would hear me messing around with my wardrobe at night. Dad built it wonky so the doors wouldn't shut smoothly. It had always made a noise. The problem was I would have been fast asleep, so no idea what she'd heard. But then I started getting woken up at night by the sound of my wardrobe doors shutting. I would never see anything though. It got to the point where it was every night those bloody wardrobe doors would wake me up and I could feel that there was a presence with me in the room. I was afraid to go to bed, afraid to sleep, and even more afraid that I'd be woken up by something. The most terrifying experiences happened though when my now husband was staying over at my parents' house with me. My parents were away for the weekend, so it was just the two of us. I'd woken up because I needed the loo, so pulled myself out of bed, opened the bedroom door to the corridor. As I was about to walk through the door, I realised that there was a man standing in front of me about 2 metres away. I didn't see his face, but his silhouette was black. I could see that this man was wearing what looked like a hat. He was tall. Where his hands should have been, it was like they were in his pockets, and there were like 2 glowing orange lights. It actually took a little bit of time for my brain to register what I was seeing. It was terrifying. My parents used to tell me that my imagination was far too vivid, so I was really focusing and taking in what I saw to make sure it was really happening. After what felt like ages, but in reality it was probably about 15 seconds, I realised that I was actually looking at somebody and screamed my head off. My husband woke up, and by the time we went out to look in the corridor, it was empty. We turned on the lights, the TV, and didn't go back to sleep for the rest of the night. Around that same time, but on a different night, my husband woke up in the bed next to me all of a sudden and sat completely up. This woke me up, but I was really still half asleep, and I remember looking at him and saw right behind him in the bed, literally 10 centimetres from his head, there was a face of a man staring at me. He had short grey hair and grey skin and these black beady eyes and this look of anger on his face. I was so groggy and sleepy I didn't even react to that at the time, and I assumed I was half dreaming, so kind of pulled my husband's arm to lie back down to go to sleep. Fast forward to the next morning, and I say to him, "What happened last night?" He told me that he woke up in a panic thinking somebody was behind him. And that's when I thought, oh shit, I wasn't dreaming. I did actually see that man's angry face. I got what I guess you could describe as delayed terror. because I realised that I should have been terrified in the night, but now only realising that something actually happened. I moved out and my parents put the house on the market as they wanted to move back to England. It's only when they sold the damn place that my mum finally admitted, after all these years, that she would often wake up at night to find the figure of a man hunched over her bed watching her sleep. Thanks, Mum, for making me believe I was the one with the vivid imagination all these years. It was a young single guy who bought the house, apparently. He'd received an inheritance, so I guess he thought he'd hit the jackpot with this beautiful house with a pool. I was so glad to never set foot back in that place again, but would often wonder if he experienced the same things that we did. I avoided the village for years, partly because I was so traumatised by the place after living in fear for most of my time there, and partly because it made me sad that my parents had moved away. There were too many memories. One day when my little one was napping in the back of the car, my husband and I decided to go for a drive and spontaneously took the decision to drive by the old house. I almost felt sick with anxiety going up the road. I think it's hard to understand just how deeply it can affect you living in fear for so long. The house had been ripped down and a new property development had been built on that land. And I often wonder if that poor guy who bought the place was as terrified as us and sold it as soon as he could. I was glad to see it gone. Thank you, Helen, for sending in our first paranormal experience.
Dibrig tú go díon ó chánig tú go dtí an chathair seo, fuair his neart taithí agus d'urbair de chud scileanna. I ngacháte éigean tú, fecinn tú rud éige na chabhraigh tú a thógáil, ach inis tá tú ag féchant ar an todhchaí, agus beidir go bhfuil tú ag smaoinemh ar an áit as a dagan tú. In éireann, tastaíonn pleanálathe, siúnéirí, ploméirí, díanadóirí, inaltóirí, altíirí, banistóirí láithreáin agus níos móhain. Tastaíonn túhain, le do chud scileanna agus taithí go léir, chun cabhrúlinn na mílte tithe a thógáil. Tá an domhan tóga agat, a níos tar arás agus tógan teach a thóg tú. Tuile eolais ag gov.ie/Building Ireland. Teachtareacht ó Rialtas na hÉireann.
Now, let's get into our second. My paranormal experience occurred about 10 years ago now. I was in my early 20s and a military wife living on a base in Tennessee. I was happy to be back in Tennessee. I'd spent much of my early childhood there with my mother and my nana. My mother died just after my 12th birthday, and my nana followed within the next few years, so I had not been back to visit in quite some time. The first house we lived in on the base was old, probably some of the original on-base housing to be built on the base. I loved the house and was excited to finally start married life together and set up a home. The only area that I could not handle was our laundry/pantry. On-base housing is usually connected to your neighbours in a duplex style. Our laundry room or pantry sat behind the kitchen, and shared a wall with the people next door. Every single time I stepped into that room, the hairs on my body stood on end and I felt like I was being watched. My husband would laugh when I would dash in and out to put the vacuum away and run back out. Something was just off, although I seemed to be the only one that felt that way. When the opportunity came to move houses into a newer and larger house on base, we jumped at the chance. We got lucky enough to have a corner lot, and that meant that we only had neighbours on one side of us, which we really liked. The house was new, everything was clean, and I had space to organise and could decorate. There was nothing I didn't like about the new house. We enjoyed entertaining and living there. As you can imagine, being a spouse to somebody in the military comes with a lot of alone time. I didn't mind it. I'm an introvert and a homebody by nature, and I enjoy being home alone. These were the nights I would spend deep cleaning, which I actually enjoy doing. Blame my anxiety for that one. And I would usually end up watching some sort of historical period drama or movie, my favourite. At the time before I had children, it was normal for me to go to bed around 3 a.m. A night owl true and true. I always liked when the world was quiet around me. On this particular night, my husband had a 24-hour shift, something that happened every 2 to 3 months as the shift rotated. He would get home the next morning around 8 after his relief came in for the next shift. I spent my evening doing my normal routine, cleaning, taking a bath, indulging in some historical romance show. Nothing about that evening was out of the ordinary, nothing felt off, and I didn't feel any anxiety about being home alone. Living on base made me feel pretty secure, to say the least. I went up to bed about 1:30, sent my husband a text telling him good night and that I loved him, and laid down for the night. I fell asleep pretty quickly, which was rare for me. Sometime later, I found myself in the craziest dream I've ever had. In the dream, I was standing on a country road at night. It was dark and foggy, but the moon was low in the sky and I could see in the distance, standing maybe 150 feet away, was my nana. The women in my mother's side of the family have always been sensitive to things. My aunt and I often talked about these things. My mother seemed to have premonitions in her dreams, and my aunt felt like both my mother and my nana visited her often. So I just remember being really happy to see my nana. It had been so long since I had. There were no words spoken. Looking back on it, I realised there was no sound at all. We were just looking at each other, like being in one another's presence was enough. Then it changed. Like something out of a horror movie, she moved so quickly, it happened before I realised it. She had come directly in front of my face and screamed. Not a word, just a mouth wide open, shrill scream. I jolted awake, shaking immediately. And I grabbed my phone, looked down at it, and it read 3 a.m. I just remember feeling really shaken and pulled my dog into me. My nana helped raise me from a baby until I was about 3, so I spent a lot of time with her when I was little. She had always told me if I had a nightmare to roll onto my other side, something about resetting your body so you don't just fall back into the same dream. Something I still subconsciously do to this day. So what did I do after realising I had had a nightmare, albeit one that seemed extremely real? I rolled to my left side from my right, reset my brain and all that. And just as I rolled over to my right side, that's when I saw him. A man standing in the doorway of my bedroom. He must have been over 6 feet tall. His head was barely under the trimwork framing of the doorway. I couldn't really make out his full features because of the time of night it was, but I could see his entire silhouette. I turned to grab my phone off the nightstand, and by the time I turned back, he was gone, vanished. Not a sound had been made. My dog that was lying right beside me had not made a sound, and I was shaking. I immediately called my husband in a panic and started telling him that he needed to come home right away, that there was a man in the house. I was so sure that somebody was there. There was not a doubt in my mind. My husband stayed on the line with me while I searched the entire house and turned on every single light there was. The initial search found the house empty and exactly like I had left it before I went to bed. I was so sure someone was there that I made my husband stay on the line while I checked every window, door, closet, and even checked our cabinet. Nothing. Everything was locked and secure, and I was there alone. My husband and I talked a while longer, and I calmed down enough to hang up the call. After a bit of sitting alone in the middle of the living room with everything that was operational lit up in our house, I realised that my nana was there warning me. I felt like she was watching me that night. Maybe she is every night, but she needed to intervene that night. I saw that man one more time, several months later. This time in a dream. But in the dream we were standing in the kitchen of the first home that we had lived in. The one with the room that set my hairs on end. And he was just standing in the doorway of the laundry room. It was just a shadow. And then he shattered is the best way to describe it. Light that started in the middle of my torso expanded until it sent shards of the shadow clattering to the ground. That was the end of it. Although waking to see somebody standing in your doorway in itself is frightening to its core, I found looking back that I was not afraid of him, just the event itself, I guess. Don't ask me to explain, but my feelings regarding this shadow man are almost one of sadness. I feel like he was peering in on me, confused. And then I sometimes think, what if I was a ghost to him? What if the veil was just thin enough that we could see each other passing? And what if he was just another soldier trying to come home? And thank you to Chloe for sending in our second paranormal encounter. You know what, I got these two paranormal experiences quite close to one another quite recently, and I think they just fit really well together in this episode. And I know, slap on the wrist, I should really be going in order of when I receive your encounters. And also, if you have your own paranormal encounter that you'd like me to narrate on the show and be made into a future episode, you can send it to scaryaparanormalpodcast@gmail.com, and it just might get featured. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and don't forget to press that follow button so you don't miss any future episodes. And we got some lovely new reviews the past few weeks, so thank you to those people who have took the time to write something really nice about the show. It really does mean a lot, and I read every single one of them, and any Spotify comments you make underneath the episodes as well. Thank you so much for listening, and join me next time for another episode of Scary.
You've worked hard since you arrived in the city, gained loads of experience, developed your skills. Everywhere you look, you see something you helped build. But now, you're looking to the future, and maybe you're thinking about where you come from. In Ireland, we need planners, carpenters, plumbers, roofers, engineers, architects, site managers, and more. We need you, with all your skills and knowledge, to help us build thousands of homes. You've built the world. Now come back and build the home that built you. For more information, visit gov.ie/Building Ireland. Brought to you by the Government of Ireland.